Jackson gently pushed open the glass door and stepped into one of the very stores he had once built from nothing. He wore a weathered jacket with worn shoulders, faded jeans, and the faint shadow of stubble on his chin. To any bystander, he looked like just another middle-aged man wandering through a store, perhaps looking for something, perhaps just passing time. Quietly, he walked down each aisle, pausing here and there to pick up a few small household items. Then he made his way to the customer service counter, a place that was supposed to be the heartbeat of every store. But the counter was empty. 3 customers were already lined up, their faces etched with weariness and barely concealed frustration. Moments later, a young employee emerged from a side door, headphones still in, eyes locked onto his phone. There was no apology, no glance of acknowledgement, just a flat, indifferent, "What do you need?" Jackson took a soft breath, steadying himself, and gave a polite nod. "I just wanted to ask the price of this item." But the young man didn't even look up. He jerked his chin toward a far corner of the store and mumbled, "There's a scanner over there, you can check it yourself." Jackson remained still for a moment, his gaze following the employee as he walked away. A dull ache settled in his chest, a memory stirred, of the early years when he himself had knelt on cold tile floors, scrubbing them spotless just to make the store feel welcoming. Now, an employee of his own wouldn't even lift his head to greet a stranger. In that instant, Jackson knew he couldn't stay silent anymore. Jackson hadn't come from wealth. He had grown up in a small wooden house on the outskirts of a quiet town, where his mother worked as a librarian and his father laid bricks as a construction worker. He hadn't learned kindness from textbooks, but from the way his father always tipped his hat to strangers with respect. And the day his mother spent her entire paycheck just to buy him a new pair of shoes for school. During college, Jackson studied during the day and worked nights in a warehouse. He lifted boxes, mopped floors, hauled crates until every joint in his body throbbed. But during those hard years, a quiet dream began to take root. Building a store chain for working-class people, where quality and affordability could live side by side. He named it Homefield, a place that would feel like home the moment someone stepped inside. Homefield had grown from one modest storefront into over 300 locations across the country. Jackson's face had appeared on magazine covers. He gave keynote speeches at conferences, signed multi-million-dollar deals. But the more accolades he earned, the more he felt himself drifting away from what mattered most: people and the authenticity of their experiences. Every week, his team sent him glowing reports, steady growth charts, solid customer feedback, financial metrics that all pointed up. But beneath those numbers, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something was unraveling. One morning, he opened the company inbox, scrolling through countless emails, until one brief line stopped him cold. "I used to love your store, but yesterday I was treated like I was a burden." The message came from a 74-year-old woman, a loyal customer from the very first year Homefield opened. Jackson went still. He remembered her. How he'd personally wrapped her purchase back then, when the store didn't even have a receipt printer. He looked around his sleek, modern office, glass walls, financial projections, contracts stacked in folders, but not a single real human face in sight. That very afternoon, Jackson quietly took off his suit, put on an old jacket, and walked out of headquarters. He was going back, not to oversee, not to inspect, but to remember. Back to the origin. Back to the store. But this time, no one would know who he was. Jackson chose store number 233, a small branch tucked away in the outskirts of Salt Point, far enough from headquarters that no one there had ever seen him. There was no reason for anyone to suspect a thing. He parked at the far end of the lot, where the cold wind cut through the silence, carrying with it the brittle scent of fallen leaves skittering across the pavement. He glanced at his reflection in the car window, a disheveled man with tousled hair, scuffed shoes, and a weathered coat. He hardly looked like someone who once sat at the helm of a nationwide brand. The automatic doors slid open. Inside, the store was clean and brightly lit. The faint aroma of coffee drifted from a small corner kiosk. Shelves were neatly arranged. Sale signs popped in bold colors, grabbing the eye with promises of deals. On the surface, it looked like everything was in order. Once again, Jackson stepped into the world he had devoted his youth to building, but this time, he didn't bring titles or authority. He came only as a man searching for something he'd lost along the way: human connection. And yet, something about the air inside felt cold. Not the chill of air conditioning, but a deeper cold. One that came from silence, from the emptiness between people. No one smiled. No one greeted him. Not a single glance met his. Jackson drifted like a shadow among them, unnoticed and unacknowledged. He picked up a few small items, a couple of bath towels, a kitchen knife, a light bulb. His steps were slow, his eyes tracing every corner as if he were searching for something long forgotten. And then he saw it. The customer service counter, standing beneath a brightly painted sign that read, "We're always here to help." But behind the gleaming glass, there was no one. Jackson walked closer, a muscle memory guiding his steps. This desk used to be the very heart of hospitality. 3 people were already waiting. An elderly woman clutched a receipt with trembling hands. A young father rocked a sleepy baby in his arms. A third man stared at his watch repeatedly, as though each second ticked away a part of his patience. No one was speaking. No one was being helped. No apologies. No explanations. Jackson quietly took his place at the end of the line. Minutes passed. 4. Then 5. Then 6. Until finally a young man wearing a baseball cap emerged from the side door. One earbud still in. Eyes glued to his phone. No greeting. No acknowledgement. He slouched behind the counter as if no one were standing there at all. The elderly woman gently spoke first. "Excuse me, I need to exchange this item." But before she could finish, the young man cut her off, visibly annoyed. "No returns without a clear barcode. Read the policy." Jackson narrowed his eyes. There was no courtesy, no empathy, not even the pretense of care. What he saw wasn't just unprofessional. It was a crack running through the very foundation of everything he had once fought for. A quiet, aching disappointment spread through his chest. Not anger, disappointment. One by one, the customers left without a word. No thank yous, no apologies for the wait, just small shakes of the head, a shrug of resignation. Now it was his turn. Jackson smiled politely and held up an item. "Excuse me, could you help me check the price of this?" The young man didn't look up, didn't change his expression. He simply jerked his chin toward the back of the store. "Scan it yourself. Machine's over there." His words came out like a message left on voicemail. Flat, practiced, empty. Jackson stood still for a moment. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. What he felt was deeper, quieter. It was the silence of someone who had once gotten down on his knees to scrub floors just to earn a single grateful smile from a customer. And now, here he was, founder of this very place, treated like a burden. Jackson's gaze flicked up to the slogan hanging behind the counter. "Home field, serving you like family." The words were still there, but the spirit behind them had vanished long ago. He held the item in his hand and slowly walked toward the self-checkout area. A polite smile still lingered on his face, but his eyes had changed. They were sharper, more searching. As he moved through the store, he began to notice things he'd missed before. A shelf had toppled over, yet nobody bothered to right it. A bright sale sign hung crookedly. In the aisle, an elderly customer struggled with a shopping cart that had a broken wheel, but not a single employee stopped to help. At the back, 2 workers were laughing together, neither wearing a name tag, just empty uniforms and easy camaraderie. On the surface, everything seemed fine. The shelves were well stocked, the systems were running, but the soul of the store had been drained. The dedication, the attentiveness, the mutual respect. Those core values Jackson had once built Homefield upon were gone. He remembered the early days, when every employee knew regular customers by name, when handwritten thank you notes were tucked into bags, when serving like family was more than a banner, it was the way they lived. But now, no one even made eye contact. Jackson walked past the kitchenware section. A young couple stood in front of the cookware display, whispering in disappointment. "I asked someone if they had it in black," the woman said quietly, and not a soul came near. At the checkout lanes, long lines had formed. One scanner was broken, and no one came to fix it. A frail woman fumbled with a barcode. An employee glanced over, then looked back down at their phone. Jackson scanned the entire store with weary eyes. Everything was operational, but the people weren't. No communication, no initiative, no empathy. It felt like a mindless machine. Customers reduced to numbers. Staff present in body but absent in spirit. And then he understood. The problem wasn't just about one rude employee. It was the environment itself. A system that, bit by bit, taught people to stop caring. In the stale air and lifeless atmosphere, Jackson paused in the housewares aisle. There, a middle-aged man knelt on the floor, carefully restacking a pile of pots a customer had knocked over. No hurry, no frustration, just deliberate, patient care, as if time had slowed to allow this moment. When he finished, he stood up and brushed his dusty hands together. His Homefield uniform was faded from years of use, but his shoes were clean, his shirt neatly tucked. No name tag, no fuss, just quiet dignity. Jackson pretended to browse nearby, but watched him closely. The man looked up. Their eyes met. Then a genuine smile spread across his face. No script, no rehearsal, just authentic warmth. "Need a hand with anything, friend?" His voice was steady and comforting. Jackson nodded, quietly caught off guard. For the first time all morning, he felt recognized as a real person with a real need. He pointed at the kitchen knife set in his hand. "Do you know if there's a better version of this?" The man examined the set carefully, then nodded. "They got a new batch in last week. Higher grade steel, not much more expensive, but if you cook often, I'd stick with this one. It holds an edge longer and is safer for older hands." There was no hard sell, just honest advice. Then he pointed toward another aisle. "I could fetch a sample if you want to check it out." Jackson offered a soft smile. "No, thank you. I just wanted to say thanks." The man nodded, then turned and returned to his shelf, movements paced and calm. Jackson watched for several more seconds, feeling his own chest relax as though a burden had been lifted. In a place full of indifference, experiencing genuine presence felt almost magical. He stepped forward. "Excuse me, how long have you worked here?" The man looked up, eyes mild surprise before breaking into a warm laugh. "Almost 10 years, kid, since this store was just a tiny thing." Jackson nodded, reflecting. "So you'd know most of the regulars around here?" He smiled. "Yeah. Some come in weekly. I help old folks with their carts. The little ones, they love the candy I tuck in my apron pocket." He wasn't bragging, just sharing his daily rhythms. "I'm Ron." He extended a hand. Rough and calloused from work, but genuine. Jackson shook his hand. In that moment, he didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a customer, served with sincerity. Jackson hesitated before asking, "Do you still love this job?" Ron smiled steadily. "I do. Every morning I come in and I still find a reason to be here." He glanced at the customer service counter, where Kyle had just turned away another customer. "But it's getting harder." Jackson said nothing. Ron exhaled. We're short-staffed. New hires are thrown into last-minute shifts, given a quick orientation, then shoved out front. Everyone's just holding on. Sometimes I want to help them, but my voice doesn't carry like it used to. Jackson studied him. Ron wasn't complaining. He was stating the truth, calm and concerned. In a cold, rigid machine, Ron was the rare spark of warmth remaining, and that sparked something in Jackson. A wave of shame and resolve. Jackson studied the man carefully. This wasn't a complaint. It was honest, calm, and filled with unspoken concern. In a cold, mechanical machine of a store, Ron was the only spark of warmth left, and that realization hit Jackson in the gut. He felt ashamed. He thanked Ron once more, then resumed his act as an ordinary shopper. But in his mind, fragments started to fall into place. What he'd witnessed that morning, the apathy, the robotic routines, and the one employee who still kept the flame alive, were all pointing him back to a truth he'd long forgotten. It wasn't the system, it wasn't the numbers, it was people. People who were the real soul of Homefield. Jackson walked past the restroom. The trash bin was overflowing. Litter was scattered across the floor. A damp, stale stench told him someone had abandoned basic maintenance along with the neglect. He turned into a fitting room. The mirror was fogged in dust, its glass marred, like the indifference creeping over this place. One bare bulb overhead flickered, its sputtering glow feeling like the store's ailing heart. Down the main aisle, a large, unopened shipment box blocked the path. No warning sign, no staff to move it. Minor oversights. But for Jackson, they were like cracks appearing in a long-neglected structure. His store was exhausted. He quietly made his way to the employee break room. Standing before a faded bulletin board, he pretended to read announcements, but his eyes were actually searching for signs that somebody, anyone, still cared. A young employee walked out. Jackson cleared his throat and asked, "Is there someone here named Ron? He helped me earlier." The young man furrowed his brow. "You mean the old guy who fixes shelves all the time? Yeah, he's good, but they've overlooked him for team lead a few times. Always choose newer hires instead." Jackson merely nodded. A loyal veteran, ignored, a rookie promoted. Somewhere, the system had gone off track. Jackson continued on and slipped into the stockroom through a slightly open door labeled "Employees Only," no unauthorized entry. Nobody stopped him, no cameras, no name tags. Nobody watched if he entered or not. It was as though the store didn't care if it even existed. Inside, pallets of boxes rose above head height. None were labeled. A wooden shelf had snapped and was precariously propped up with a cardboard box. The inventory scanner sat untouched and thick with dust, as though abandoned for months. The ceiling light buzzed and flickered. No one had bothered to replace it. In the corner, a staff suggestion board had fallen at an angle, one side detached from the wall. A crumpled paper lay on the floor beneath it. Jackson picked it up. The handwriting was messy, but direct. "Customer service is understaffed. Many complaints. Recommend adding support shifts. Signed, Ron." Dated 4 months ago. No reply. No action. Jackson clenched the paper in his hand, his eyes going blank with realization. Beneath this pristine corporate image lay a machine quietly falling apart, and everyone just ignored it. He stepped back onto the main shopping floor. Everything was still running, beep beep of scanners, soft background music, but now Jackson didn't see a store, he saw a hollow shell, devoid of heart. Ron was helping an elderly woman load boxes into her cart. Kyle was leaning against the service counter, eyes glued to his phone again. Another employee bumped into a customer and didn't even look up to apologize. Everybody moved, but nobody was present. Jackson paused mid-aisle, his gaze fixed on the giant banner high above. Home field, serving you like family. But in that moment, it wasn't the banner that spoke. It was a memory. Whether they're loyal regulars or complete strangers, treat them as you would your own family. He'd penned those words himself on a scrap of paper and taped it inside the first shop. Now, no one remembered them. No one believed, and perhaps he was the first person ever to truly forget. The anger didn't burst forth like a wildfire. It seeped in quietly, coursing through his veins. And it hurt. He turned and walked toward the exit, retracing the path he'd made. No one asked him a question. No one said goodbye. The automatic doors slid open into the afternoon breeze that drifted across his collar. He paused in the doorway and looked back one last time. The store still stood there, lifeless, like a well-oiled machine that had completed a cold, emotionless cycle. The familiar slogan glowed on the glass: friendly experience, honest prices. He lingered for a moment, uncertainty flickering within him. Was this regret? Anger? Shame? Not because the store was failing, but because it had once been something great, and he himself built it. At the side door, Ron appeared, pushing a cart. He locked eyes with Jackson and offered a warm, friendly wave. No hesitation, no recognition required. Jackson nodded in return. In that instant, Jackson knew. He couldn't go back behind a desk and look away. Not anymore. In that moment, Jackson realized he couldn't go on hiding behind a desk. He couldn't lead from afar. He couldn't remain on the sidelines. He had to come back, not as a CEO, but as a man determined to restore what he had lost. That night, Jackson returned to the corporate headquarters. He didn't turn on any lights. He sat alone in the quiet office, the city's distant glow filtering through the windows. His computer screen came to life in front of him. He opened the file for store number 233. The store was labeled stable. Jackson stared at the word, letting it sink in. A question echoed in his mind. Stable, stable. At what cost? I've let the system replace people. Those words fell across the room like thunder in stillness. No shifting chairs. No sighs. Just Jackson's steady gaze, reaching into the hidden corners of every soul in that office. He didn't shout. He didn't point fingers. But every carefully spoken word cracked through the hardened shell of complacency. I thought if I built a strong system, people would naturally do the right thing. But I was wrong. A system can run, but without a heart, it's just an empty shell. He paused, hands resting gently on the table, steady as the roots of an ancient tree weathering a storm. I read through those personnel files last night, and the thing that hurt most, I didn't know who Ron was until yesterday. Ron swallowed. The room fell entirely silent. Jackson turned and looked directly at him. You don't need a trophy. You need acknowledgement, and I've failed to do that. I owe you a profound apology. Ron said nothing, but tears glistened in his eyes. An uncommon dignity, finally recognized after years of being overlooked. Jackson turned toward Kyle. I also reviewed your file. No policy violations, always punctual, completed your shifts. But 8 times in 5 months, you've had customers report feeling unwelcomed or unsupported. And I ask, when is enough enough? When do we stop and ask ourselves if doing things right actually means doing what's right? Kyle lowered his head. No one judged him, but the weight of the truth filled the room like a suffocating fog. Jackson faced the rest of the team. I'm not here to fire anyone. I'm here to restart, right here, with all of you. He reached into his pocket and retrieved the crumpled feedback slip from Ron. He held it up, voice even but resolute. 4 months ago, one employee warned us. We're understaffed in customer service. There have been repeated complaints. We need more support. I didn't know, because the system never forced me to look. But people, they're waiting to be seen. A young employee began to cry. A coworker gently placed a hand on her shoulder. No one spoke, but their eyes reflected a rekindled hope, proof that things could be different. We're not just selling merchandise, Jackson continued. We're rebuilding trust. From now on, every voice matters. Every suggestion deserves attention. Every person deserves to be seen. He turned his gaze back to Ron. And if you'll accept, I'd like you to be the first leader of our new transformation team. Not because of seniority, because you never stopped caring. Ron stood. The entire room turned to watch. He said nothing. Instead, he stepped forward and embraced Jackson. A brief but powerful hug, full of unspoken meaning. The room seemed to burst in silent release, not cheers, but the sound of hope returning. That day, nobody left early. They straightened the feedback board, fixed flickering lights, cleaned windows, reloaded printer paper. Not because anyone ordered them to, not for overtime pay, just because they felt compelled to act. That was the day home field began to revive, not with flashy rebrands or media campaigns, but through the awakening of a man who had lost his own heart and found it again. Jackson paused, his voice dropping to a softer, more profound tone. And I won't stop here. I will visit every store. With no notice, no closed-door meetings, I'll walk through every aisle and look into every person's eyes. Applause broke out again, this time not just polite support, but a quiet promise that everyone in the room would walk beside him. Jackson walked slowly toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Ron. Dennis, there's something you once said, that every morning you felt there was a reason to come here. He smiled gently. Today, you've given that back to all of us. Ron nodded, and this time the whole room stood in respect, not because they were told, but because they felt moved. Outside, sunlight streamed softly through the frosted window. A new day was beginning. Yet inside that room, something far greater was being born. A rebirth. Not through loud declarations or policies, but from one man daring to face himself. Starting today, Jackson continued, you'll work under the guidance of the person I trust most in this room. He turned to Ron, his expression firm but not demanding. No training manual can teach kindness. Only people, through the way they live and act, can pass it on. Ron looked startled. Kyle turned to him, stunned. In that moment, the divide between two generations was bridged, not by age, but by a circle of trust. Kyle lowered his head. Ron gave a small nod, wordless, and placed a hand gently on Kyle's shoulder. No blame, just a beginning. Jackson, standing between them, knew he had finally done what he should have done long ago. He swept his gaze across the room. I didn't come here for just one store. I came because I needed to see what was really happening under all those polished numbers. He moved slowly toward the small window overlooking the parking lot. His tone softened, almost self-reflectively. Indifference doesn't start with the staff. It starts at the top, with me, with leadership, the moment we decided numbers could define a person. He turned back, eyes clear and unwavering. I promise you, starting today, it won't just be this store that changes. The entire system will be reviewed. Every policy, every training program, every metric we use to evaluate people. A hush fell. Some eyes filled with tears. Others nodded slowly, resolute. We will stop measuring our staff by punctuality and productivity alone. We'll start measuring kindness. Jackson turned to the faded slogan on the whiteboard. Home field, serving you like family. He let his eyes linger on each face. We plastered these words everywhere, on the walls, the website, the packaging. But a slogan doesn't keep a company's soul alive. A soul lives when each person chooses kindness, even when nobody's watching. He placed a hand over his heart and spoke with deep sincerity. I used to believe success meant opening more stores. Now I understand real success is when every store becomes a place people want to return to. Without another word, Jackson exited the room. Everyone rose, voluntarily, without instruction. Not because of rank, but because they remembered that they could be part of something meaningful. Jackson left the meeting room without turning back. The door closed softly behind him. Inside, the space remained silent, not from shock, but from contemplation, a silence full of reflection. They were all reconsidering how they had treated others. Ron was the first to rise. He didn't speak, just silently nodded to each coworker, conveying, "We'll do this." Kyle remained seated, hands folded. He didn't look down anymore. The glint in his eyes had changed. A young colleague whispered to another, "Today really felt different." Outside, Jackson stepped through the glass doors. A gentle breeze brushed his coat. He looked up at the sign above, "Home Field." And for the first time in years, he felt those words carried true meaning again. "Don't need to stay and supervise. I believe they'll know how to do what's right." Jackson smiled softly. He didn't step inside. For the first time in years, he felt it clearly. I don't need to control everything. I just need to know when to trust. And when it's time to start again. As he turned to leave, a quiet thought passed through his mind. A company doesn't live in reports or data. It lives in the hands of those who still carry a heart, even when no one asks them to. A company can own hundreds of stores, employ thousands of people, and generate millions in revenue. But if the people inside stop seeing each other as teammates, if they stop treating customers like family, then that company becomes just a name lit up on a sign. Jackson had built Home Field with strategy, ambition, and relentless effort. But he had nearly lost it all, because he forgot the one thing that holds everything together, a culture of kindness. And then, from a small store, through one quiet employee, he found it again. Not through slogans, not through bonuses, but through people being heard, being seen, and being trusted. A business doesn't truly live on a balance sheet. It lives in the quiet choices people make every single day, and when kindness returns, everything else finds its way. Maybe you've never run a company. Maybe you're just a regular employee, a shopper in a grocery store, or someone who's quietly endured indifference. But at some point, we've all been a little like Kyle, reckless, lost, unsure of ourselves. And sometimes we've been like Ron, giving quietly, expecting nothing in return. And one day you might be Jackson, the one who has to stop, look inward, and begin again. Because no workplace, no matter how big or small, truly runs on rules. Runs on how people treat each other. If you saw a piece of yourself in this story, leave a comment below. I've been there too. Because maybe, just maybe, that small moment of honesty will spark something good in someone else. And if you're out there right now, quietly doing the kind thing each day, thank you. You're the reason this world still holds hope.